We are now live on Zoom and YouTube, and we're going to get started. So, in this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayechi, it's the last Parsha of Sefer Bereshis, the book of Genesis. And in it, we read about the last years of Yaakov Avinu's life, the last 17 years of his life. And hence the name of the Parsha, Vayechi. Vayechi means, and he lived, because Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years, and those were his very best years. And throughout that time in Egypt, he studied Torah. He elevated the place spiritually. It says there were 288 spiritual sparks that had to be elevated, and Yaakov did most of the heavy lifting on that part. But what the Torah talks about is about him meeting his son Yosef when he was ill, when Yaakov was ill, that is, meeting Yosef's sons, Menashe and Ephraim, and how he raised them, and how he blessed his own children before he died. And then later it talks about the burial of Yaakov, and ultimately the Torah ends with the passing of Yosef, how Yosef didn't leave Egypt even in his passing. You want water? Okay. That even in his passing, Yosef didn't leave Mitzrayim, meaning because his ark stayed there to be with the people. He was a people's person. So, with all that in mind, we're going to focus on the episode where Yosef brings his two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, to be blessed by their Zayda, by Yaakov Avinu. And as we'll see, the lesson that we'll learn is the benefits of being the youngest, which is something that I'm partial to, being the youngest of 11, Kanai Nahara. And I think my mother-in-law would also appreciate this class, because she's also the youngest. And so to all those youngest out there, there's hope for us too. I don't know, where do you place in your family?
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest. Okay, so it's me versus you today. Let's see who wins.
Yeah.
So we'll start with source 1, which is from this week's Torah portion, Genesis 48:1, and other verses throughout chapter 48. After these events, continue reading. I'll start with the reading. After these events, what? I should save your water. Okay, you're going. Okay, you're going to bed now? Okay, good Nacht. After these events, someone said to Joseph, "Behold, your father is ill." He took his two sons with him, Menashe and Ephraim. Fast forward, Israel saw Joseph's sons, and he said, "Who are these?" Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons, whom God has given me in this place." He said, "Please take them to me, and I will bless them." Keep in mind, Yaakov was hard of seeing at this point. He was 147 years old.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's how old he was when he passed. I'm not sure exactly how close in proximity it was to his passing. So, the verses continue. Joseph took the two of them, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left, and Menashe in his left toward Israel's right. Right? So, his right is Israel's left. And he brought them near to him. Israel again is another name for Yaakov Avinu.
Right.
So Israel stretched out his right hand and placed it on the head of Ephraim, although he was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Menashe. He deliberately positioned his hands even though Menashe was the firstborn. So Menashe is put right in front of Yaakov's right hand, and instead he gets his left hand.
Was there
very deliberately?
Reason, I mean, kind of like he had a favoritism thing for younger.
So we're gonna get into that. Yeah, that's the big part of today's discussion. Why this way? Why did Joseph position them that way, etc. And then it says, he blessed Joseph and said, "God before whom my fathers walked, Abraham and Isaac, God who has shepherded me from my inception until this day, the angel who redeemed me from all evil, may he bless the lads May my name be called upon them together with the name of my fathers Avram and Yitzchak, and may they multiply like fish within the land. V'yidgul arov b'kerev haaretz. Okay, so he gave them a beautiful blessing. Fantastic. And then Joseph saw that his father placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, and it was displeasing to him. It actually says, Vayera be'inav. It was bad in his eyes. He took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head and place it on Menashe's head. Joseph said to his father, No, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. In other words, Menashe, the older one. However, his younger brother will be greater than he, and the fame of his descendants will fill the nations. That is the story as it's written and roughly translated over here. So what's this all about? What was Yosef thinking? So we'll ask Yosef to read about that on page 2.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Top of the page.
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Joseph thought that Manasseh should be blessed before Ephraim, and that Jacob should place his right hand on Manasseh's head. Jacob, however, said to him, I know, my son, I know. I understand your opinion, that your opinion is that Manasseh should come first because he is the firstborn. My opinion is that his younger brother will be greater than he, and therefore he should come first. And that is indeed what he did. The Kli Yakar explains that both Joseph's approach and Jacob's approach have a valid basis and justification, according to the Torah. First of all, the blessing in question which Jacob gave to Joseph and his sons was a blessing of abundance. May they multiply like fish within the land. He proceeds to explain why Jacob thought that this blessing should specifically be given to the younger brother.
Okay. So here we're going to quote the Kli Yakar, which explains why Jacob felt that the younger brother should be more deserving of this greater blessing, even though, according to Joseph's logical reasoning, the firstborn should get the double portion, right? As we know in Jewish law, firstborns get the double portion, and that's true. So here's the Kli Yakar in source 2. Joseph felt it appropriate to give the eldest son the blessing of abundance, as the eldest son receives a double portion of the inheritance. So we know that that's a well-established Jewish fact, that firstborns are given privileges. Jacob replied, I know, my son, I know. Repeating, I know. Meaning to say, I know the eldest receives double, and from this perspective, he deserves a greater portion of the blessing for abundance. However, his younger brother will become greater, for God chooses the smaller. One who has an element of smallness is lifted up by God. So he's saying, I know that he's older, but I also have other information, which makes me bless the younger child. This occurred with all of Abraham's descendants. So there's something about the smallness. It says in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 22, that the small one will become 1,000 and the young one will be a great nation. So
Wait, say that again.
Hakaton yiyeh elef. The small one will be for 1,000. In other words, he who is small will grow up to something great.
Okay.
So we see this thematically throughout history, that the small one always, not always, but there is certainly a running theme that the small one ends up being greater. How do we see this? This occurred with all of Abraham's descendants. Yishmael, Abraham's eldest, was passed over in favor of Isaac. Esav in favor of Jacob. Reuven, Jacob's eldest son, in favor of Yosef, because Yosef ended up being the king. He ended up having 2 of the 12 tribes came from Joseph, right?
Right.
And Joseph's eldest, Menashe, in favor of Ephraim, meaning Menashe was passed over in favor of Ephraim, the younger one. So we see that there's something about being the younger one, the smaller one. And so the Rebbe elaborates in matters of holiness, the fact that something is externally relatively small is not a deficiency. On the contrary, God usually chooses the small, and anyone who possesses an element of smallness is elevated and raised up to become many thousands. It is specifically the smaller one who serves as a vessel for God's very essence, and it is specifically he who receives the loftiest blessings. There's a concept of kli rekon machzik, kli male ena machzik. An empty vessel, right?
Yeah,
If you want to pour water into an empty cup,
right.
it's very easy to pour water into there. But if you have a full cup and you try pouring water into there, you're going to face some challenges, right? So, to put it mildly, and if it's gasoline, you have an even bigger problem. So,
Right.
so the idea is the smaller one is a better receptacle for greater blessings. This is indeed what occurred with Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim was the younger one, and precisely for this reason, he was a greater receptacle for Jacob's blessings. This is why he received the blessing before Manasseh. So, okay, interesting observation. We'll take that, right? It's an interesting fact that, the smaller one, yeah. Okay, but what does that have to do with us? What's the relevance to us? The Baal Shem Tov teaches us that everything we see and hear, everything we learn, certainly in Torah, has to be a lesson for me and you. How do we live differently because of this information? So the Rebbe says this idea also applies to our divine service. Regarding Torah study, it is specifically through conducting oneself in the manner of let my soul be like dust to all. We say that in the Amidah towards the end, the last few verses. Being in a state of self-effacement and smallness to the point of being like dust, that we become a vessel capable of receiving the blessing of open my heart to your Torah. Psach libi b'Toratecha, open my heart to your Torah. So in other words, sometimes intuitively a person would think that in order to really comprehend Torah well, I have to be a Torah expert. The more I know, the better I'll be able to understand the next class I go to. And I have to study up, and I have to get myself ready, and I have to have all this background, and then I'll be ready to study Torah. The truth of the matter is that Torah goes better into empty vessels. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to delete all the past information you have. If you do have prior Jewish background and prior Torah knowledge, of course, that's not a deficiency. But what we're saying is, put that all aside. Yeah. Don't come to the table saying, "Oh, I have what to share." No, I mean, obviously, if your job is to give the class, then you got to do your job. Yeah. But if you're coming to learn, you have to come with an open heart and an open mind and an empty vessel, so to speak. That's the lesson that we learn from this, to come with an approach of smallness. And we see this from the differences between Hillel and Shammai, two famous schools of thought, two famous rabbis, Hillel and Shammai. And the Talmud discusses this in Tractate Eruvin, here in source 3. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Shmuel, the school of Shammai argued with the school of Hillel for 3 years. One said the law follows us, and the other said the law follows us. A heavenly voice called out, both are words of the living God, and the law follows the school of Hillel. Now, Gemara asks, if both are words of the living God, why does the law follow the school of Hillel? Which one is it? Are they both right? The old joke, two people came to the rabbi and they had a dispute. They said, I say that. And the rabbi said, you know what, you're both right. And the Rebbetzin was standing by and says, how could they both be right? It doesn't make any sense. How could they both be right? He says, you're also right. Anyways, so how could Hillel be the right one? How could the halacha follow Hillel if both of them are the words of the living God? And the Gemara answers, because they were gentler and humbler they would teach their opinion and include the school of Shammai's opinion. Moreover, they would begin with the opinion of the school of Shammai before stating their own. So they would introduce the opinion of Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says a sukkah could be, this is not necessarily factual, but a sukkah could be 30 amos high, and Beis Hillel says it has to be 20 amos high, and the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So that's kind of how the mode of study. And by the way, if you look in the text of the Mishnah, usually when the Mishnah quotes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, it does indeed quote Beis Shammai first, which is to say that we're not ignoring their opinion. We have to study Shammai's opinion because that is also Torah. However, in practice, we follow the opinion of Beis Hillel. Let's see what the Rebbe says in relation to this and how it applies to prayer. You want to read on page 4, the Rebbe?
The Rebbe. This concept is also relevant to prayer. It is a halakhic requirement that prayer must be carried out in a serious state of mind, with submission and humility, and considering ourselves as small. It is specifically through such conduct that our prayer draws down a flow of all divine blessings, extending even beyond all measures and limitations.
Okay, so we see this application not just to Torah study, but in prayer also, humility is a key ingredient.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Humility is a vessel for all blessings. This is the overall lesson we can learn from the daily section of the Torah portion. We need to learn from Jacob's conduct. Just as Jacob placed Ephraim before Manasseh, because of Ephraim's qualities being the smaller one, so too should we give precedence to the smallness within ourselves over the greatness within ourselves. We all possess elements of greatness. We study Torah and observe mitzvot, including in the most meticulous manner, as we have just done during Hanukkah. Nevertheless, there is something even more elevated that must come from first, the smallness within us. Let my soul be like dust to all.
So the Rebbe is clarifying that not everything is done in a small way. In practice, we do things grandly and gloriously. You know, the one holiday that every single Jew can proudly say that they are ultra-Orthodox is Hanukkah. Why is that? Well, the Gemara says that the basic requirement to light the menorah, in other words, the traditional requirement is you light one candle every night of Hanukkah for the house.
Right.
Ishu Beisai, near Ishu Beisai, you just a candle every night of Hanukkah. Should light a candle to remember that there was a miracle with candles. Those that are meticulous, let's call them those who are orthodox, right? To borrow a term, should light for every single person in their household a candle. So if you have 4 children, a wife and 4 children, light 6 candles. Everybody lights their own candle, one candle. And those who are mahadrin, mina mahadrin, those who are ultra-Orthodox, they should, then there's a difference. Beis Shammai says you start with 8 candles on the first night to tell you how many days are left to Hanukkah, and then 7 candles on the second night, and 6 candles on the third night, etc. Right. And then the Gemara says, Beis Hillel says, you do 1 on the first night, 2 on the second night, etc., because we always go up and we increase in holiness. Now, this is the one area in Jewish practice where everybody's ultra-Orthodox. I don't know a single Jew, regardless of what they call themselves, that doesn't practice it in this way. Everybody lights a menorah going up in numbers. And looking at the WhatsApp group from Hanukkah, where people post the menorahs, I can see that most people have more than 1 menorah in their home. So we see that, and that's great. And we should do mitzvahs in a big way. When we're doing mitzvahs, we should do it in a grand way, in a big way, in the most ultra best way that we can do it. Right?
Right.
However, this going back to what the Rebbe is saying, there's something even more elevated that must come first. The smallness within us, not the smallness of our practice, smallness of how we feel ourselves, how we express ourselves. You want to continue reading? Indeed.
Indeed, it is specifically through humility and lowliness that we're able to reach high levels. As it is written, high and holy is where I dwell, and with the crushed and lowly of spirit. This means that being crushed and lowly of spirit is the vessel for drawing down God's very essence, which is beyond all forms of external revelation.
Okay. Keep going.
This drawing down of God's essence also extends into revealed aspects, generating abundance and exceptional blessings for success in Torah study and fulfillment of mitzvot, including prayer, as well as drawing down blessings for material matters, children, health, and livelihood, and in all of these with expansiveness and in a manner beyond measure and limitation.
So humility leads to both spiritual blessings and also physical blessings. And this is by the way, this concept of humility or bittul in Chassidus, as it's called, or self-nullification is a core value of Chassidic philosophy. You see, people are born with natural egos. I'll speak for myself.
Yeah.
A desire to succeed, to advance, to accumulate achievements, to be talented, to be appreciated, to be loved. And this ego is an important driving force. In fact, it often keeps us alive. It gets us off our couch in the morning or our bed.
Yeah.
Or our couch in the after, whatever.
Right.
Yeah. So it's important. It is a critical ingredient, but when it takes center stage, it can also be the greatest destroyer of a person. So because someone who is full of himself eventually has to come to face reality. He has to look himself in the mirror, and and sometimes it's difficult to fully to truly grow, and there's no room within himself for something new. And it's kind of like a cup that's filled to the brim with plain water. You can't pour any fine wine into that cup because the cup is full, right?
Right.
So somebody who believes that he already has everything and knows everything and isn't open to deeper learning, then nobody could correct that person when he makes mistakes. Which is true also not just in learning, but also in relationships. And an inflated ego doesn't allow for genuine listening or allowing space for another person's feelings. Now, if this is true in relationships between human to human, that someone who's full of himself doesn't have any space to love someone else, certainly applies with the relationship between a person and Hashem. That the more a person distances himself from ego and draws closer to bittul, to self-nullification, then the closer he becomes to God, the more space he makes for God.
Wow.
And the more filling of a vessel, the more fitting of a vessel he makes himself for God's blessings. So this bittul, this self-nullification, actually opens the heart and allows divinity to flow, both in an open divine way and also in a practical way that the physical blessings can flow from Hashem. And so when Yaakov stood before Menashe the firstborn and Ephraim the younger child, he chose to give the greater blessings to Ephraim. Not because of his age, not because he was older and greater, but because of his smallness and humility, which were the widest vessel for Hashem's blessings. And so that same quality, that same character trait of smallness and humility is what allows for deeper understanding in Torah, better relationships, etc.
His grandsons that well.
I guess so. Yeah. Maybe he assumed and he guessed right. I don't know. Let's see source 4 on the next page. Go ahead.
He blessed them on that day, saying, through you shall the people of Israel bless, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. He placed Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Israel said to Joseph, behold, I am dying. God will be with you, and he will bring you back to the land of your fathers. I have given you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow.
Okay, so the extra portion that Joseph got is
Yeah,
he had two tribes, right?
right.
Manasseh and Ephraim were the two of the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember, Levi
Yeah.
was a category unto himself, right? So Rashi clarifies what exactly did he give him? Keep reading from Rashi. The next.
One portion more than your brothers. The actual city of Shechem, which will be for you one share over your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorites, from Esau, who engaged in Amorite behavior.
Okay. So let's see what the Rebbe says here. This is also connected to the concluding verse of the daily section of the Torah portion. I think this is actually yesterday's Torah portion, technically, because today would be Wednesday. Yesterday was Tuesday. I believe that's where these verses are from. Yeah. This is also connected to the concluding verses of the daily section of the Torah portion, which states, which I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow. On the literal level, this refers to the land of the Amorites that Jacob conquered, which later became the inheritance of Ephraim and Manasseh in the land of Israel. The Amorites were the strongest of the 7 nations, so it follows that conquering the portion of the Amorites includes the conquest of all 7 nations, right? Because if you get the top guy, you got them all, right? So if you can overpower the Amorites, the head of the snake, as they call it, right? In today's geopolitics, if you get Iran, then you solve a lot of the other problems in the Middle East, right? So
Yeah.
I suppose again, I don't know anything, but
No.
yeah. So the Amorites were the strongest, and so if Jacob conquers Amorites, it opens up the whole land for him. So says the Rebbe, refining character traits in the spiritual sense, and in terms of our personal spiritual work, this means the following: the 7 nations, the Canaanites, the Amorites, and so on, symbolize the 7 negative character traits in the human heart. And the harshest and most harmful of these is represented by the Amorite. So what does it mean to defeat the Amorite or to conquer the land of the 7 nations? So the Rebbe continues. The spiritual conquest of the 7 nations is our work of conquering and refining the 7 negative traits of the heart and elevating them to holiness. Since the heart distributes blood to all the limbs, it follows that by conquering the 7 traits of the heart, our entire conduct becomes proper. In this way, we conquer the land of the 7 nations and transform it into the land of Israel, a land that desired to do the will of its creator. So, from the land of Canaan, we make Eretz Yisrael, meaning the word Eretz comes from the word Ratzon, or Ritza, which means running. It's a land that's running to do, or desiring to do the will of its creator. So we have lots of nations inside of us, so to speak. We have lots of emotions and desires and feelings and expressions. And they could be negative expressions, negative emotions, channeled to negative things. And our job is to take those same emotions of love and fear and conquering and all these emotions that we experience and use them out for holiness to transform the land from a Canaanite land, so to speak, to an Israelite land. Just to elaborate a little more, according to Kabbalah and Hasidus, the human soul is divided into 2 primary components, or it has two primary expressions, intellect and emotions. And these two things are basically what shape a person's personality. The the intellect in a healthy body it governs the emotions and is able to suppress certain feelings and awaken and channel other feelings. Right?
I suppose.
In other words, a child desires candy. Why?
Yeah.
Because
Sweet.
because it's sweet, it tastes good. Where does that desire come from? From the feeling of sweetness, of whatever chemicals and endorphins are released by eating candy. But an adult, in other words, somebody with a developed brain, is able to use that brain to create different emotions, right? You can use your brain to comprehend the ills and the harms of having too much sugar and of eating harmful food coloring and
Right.
on and on and on, right? And you
Right.
use that intellect to say, not only am I not desiring candy, but I'm actually repulsed by it. The thought of eating candy is just so contrary to any of my interests, right?
Except for chocolate, but that's enough.
Listen, chocolate. I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to argue with you on chocolate. Let's skip. Let's focus on the red 40 and yellow 5 sugary
I see the
candies.
stuff you feed your kids.
You know,
It's
like
bad.
let's not talk about my parenting right now. I'm talking about myself. So,
Right.
so in that regard, right, an adult is able to take his intellect and and dictate which emotions he should experience, right? Instead of him experiencing love and desire for candy, you can actually experience genuinely emotions of disgust and trying to repel things that are harmful for you, right?
Yeah.
Um, so so in terms of hierarchy, the intellect does stand above emotions, but despite the intellect's higher rank in a person's personality, it's often the emotion that's dominant, right? When you meet somebody who, for whatever reason, rubs you the wrong way, very often we respond emotionally
Yeah.
instead of having our intellect control our emotions all the time. So if we examine our relationships with others, we'll find that our attitude towards people is largely determined by their emotional personality rather than intellectual capacity. When we say that somebody next to us is pleasant or nice, we're talking about their emotional character. So this emotional trait, whether a person's kind-hearted or cruel, calm or angry or demanding, moderate, passionate, agitated, that all of these different emotions are what ultimately determine how others relate to them. And that's because most of human behavior is a result of the emotions of the heart. So
Yeah.
yes, maybe candy we're able to control, and even that, right? Like you said, chocolates trumps the logic, right? You have to
Right.
eat that chocolate because we do allow ourselves, or I should say, we instinctively behave according to our emotions. Now, this emotional world is divided into seven components, seven emotional attributes. Um, There's kindness, which is the attribute of love and giving. There's restraint, which is the attribute of strictness and criticism. There's compassion, which is the attribute of mercy. There's endurance, which is the drive to prevail, to be victorious. There's humility, which is a tendency to contend with an opponent. There's bonding, which is the attribute of connection and devotion, commitment. And there's expression, which is the desire to articulate things and bring them outward. Um, and these are the primary seven emotions that exist within our soul. And there are really 49 of them because each of these attributes, you can have endurance within kindness. You can have compassion within expression and all of that, right? You can have the desire to articulate, but if it's just a desire to articulate, then you're just going to say whatever's on your mind, regardless of how it affects the other person. But if you have compassion, then you're going to channel the way you express yourself with compassion, right? And all of these different emotions, when you mix them up and you mix and match 7 times 7, that's what forms a person's emotional personality. But the good news is that we're not doomed to be limited to these 7 emotions or these combinations of emotions forever, because these attributes exist in their unrefined state, but we have the ability to elevate these emotional attributes to be holy emotional attributes, right? There's lots of people who have compassion for terrorists, right?
Wow.
That's taking the emotion of compassion and channeling it in the wrong place, right? So, yeah, you can be compassionate. And you know what? Even in talking to the person who has misguided compassion, you can be compassionate to them too. And say, listen, I hear you're a compassionate person. And instead of challenging them that they should not be compassionate, say, you know what? Your job is to now take this compassion that you have very strongly and channel it to innocent people, to good people, right? So that's how we elevate our attributes. Chassidus talks about this a lot, whether we have to change our emotions to have different emotions or to change how our emotions express themselves. And it's a whole theological discussion. I'm not going to get into all of that, but let's see what the Rebbe says here in Source 5. It's from a talk in 1951 from one of the early years. The Rebbe says, the kindness of Yishmael, although it comes from the right side and therefore involves giving, nevertheless, that giving is for his own benefit, to display his wealth and the splendor of his greatness, and to gain a name and glory for himself. I'll give you an example of this.
Yeah.
You know the story of Purim, right?
Sure.
How does the Megillah start off? What's the beginning of the narrative? Opening scene?
Ahasuerus is having a big party and he's
Right.
drunk.
Exactly. He has a big party and he's drunk. Okay, leave out the drunk part. He's having a big party. He's so generous. He invites everybody to this party. What a nice guy, isn't he?
Seems that way.
It seems that way, right? But if you look at the description here, where the quote, to display his wealth and the splendor of his greatness and to gain a name and glory for himself. That starts to give us a little insight in who Achashverosh really was. He was channeling the Yishmael side of giving, the Ishmaelite type of giving. Yeah, I'm going to give. I'm going to throw a big party. Everyone's invited. You can have wine older than yourself, no matter your age, right? It's incredible. But we all understand, especially once you call it out and you name it, you're like, yeah, that he definitely fits the bill of doing it for himself. The Alter Rebbe explains this in Tanya. Here the Rebbe continues, as explained in the first chapter of Tanya, based on the statement of the sages, that all charity and kindness performed by the nations of the world is only for self-glorification. Accordingly, this also defines the manner and measure of the giving, that he gives only from the surplus, from his excess and leftovers. So it's not just the quality in how he gives, that he gives for a self-suffering way, but it also ends up spilling over into the quantity that he only decides to give when he has extras. It's interesting. You know, this is a very controversial part of Tanya. You know, where our sage, the Alter Rebbe is quoting the sages that say that the nations of the world only give for their own glory, for their own status and recognition. In fact, when the Alter Rebbe was arrested by Tsarist Russia, they interrogated him. They had like 20 something questions, and he answered each one like on Hasidic philosophy questions, not questions like where were you last week or like
Okay.
things you wrote. You said this, you said that. You're teaching people, heresy or whatever, to fight against the government or who knows what. So they asked him about this. They said, you wrote in your Tanya that we all, only do good things for ourselves. The Alter Rebbe looked at them, and this was the last question that they asked him. So he looked at them after answering all the other questions. He looked at them and says, "Would you like me to answer that too?"
Oh.
And they said, we heard enough.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's the way they say the story. So now, granted, there's always the exception, which is Chasidei Sailam. There's something called righteous Gentiles that do have the ability to do things altruistically. That does exist. But we were talking about the rule, not the exception. So, in other words, Yishmael's conduct is such that he first uses his wealth to fully satisfy all his own needs. Only after he has taken for himself and surplus remains does he give charity or perform acts of kindness, and even then, he is thinking about his own benefit and gain, about how this will elevate his image. So, Yishmael kind of kindness could look like it's benevolent, benevolent to the poor, but it doesn't come from a pure place. It doesn't come from self-nullification and from
how'd they know about Yishmael? I mean, didn't he kind of disappear?
Well, we're not saying Yishmael himself. We're talking about the spiritual energy
that he
personified by Yishmael.
Oh, okay.
In other words, his descendants and those who spiritually live in that manner.
Okay.
Right? In other words, we're contrasting Yishmael with Yitzchak's children. So there's the Jewish way of giving, and then there's the Yishmael way of giving. That's what we're contrasting here. That it's from a egocentric feeling of the giver. He wants to be seen as a giver. He gives in order to be recognized and get his name on a building and this and that and the other. So such kindness doesn't reach a level of true, genuine sacrifice, right? Because if he only has a little, or if giving is going to truly cost him something of himself, then he's not going to give. He's only going to give from a place of excess, and even then, he calculates what will I gain from it? What's my tax benefits? What will this do good for the company image that our company donated to such and such organizations, right?
Yeah.
And on and on and on. We all know those examples. So that's kindness that's focused on the self. It's focused on, I want to feel like a kind person. I want to feel like a giver. And therefore, I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So this is what we call in Chassidus kindness of klipa. So it's kindness, but it's kindness of klipa. Here the Rebbe continues, in contrast, on page 8, in contrast, the kindness of Abraham is of an entirely opposite nature. The reason for his kindness is that he regarded himself as immaterial, besides the point. We see this in Abraham's giving to all people, even to desert nomads, stemming from his profound humility and self-effacement. He truly considered himself as dust and ashes, in a state of complete self-nullification, not sensing himself as an independent entity at all. On the contrary, he saw himself as extraneous in the world. Therefore, he gave from all that he possessed, not only from excess and leftovers to others, leaving little for himself. All right, let me read that again. Therefore, he gave from all that he possessed, not only from excess and leftovers to others, leaving little for himself. Everyone else was more important in his eyes and more deserving of good than he himself. So it wasn't that, let me make my budget, see what I need, see what I want, see, how much I can afford for vacation, where I'd like to go, what's on my bucket list. And then when I'm done, if there's some excess and I'm struggling to figure out what to assign, fine, I'll donate it to a local charity. Shkoyach. Okay, very nice. So and oh, let me make sure that it's a charity that everybody knows about and is well respected, and then I'll be looked at as a really admirable
Nice
giver,
person, yeah.
right? But with Avram Avinu, it was the opposite. Said there's so much good that needs to be done with this money. There's so much needed out there. Let me go and give, and then after the fact, sometimes I'm struggling to figure out how am I going to have something left for myself. That's the Avram approach. In other words, by the very nature of kindness, there is a tendency to give and to bestow generously and without limitation. Moreover, the other comes before the self because the giver views himself as insignificant while seeing the value and worth of every other person, whoever they may be. Accordingly, the manner and measure of his giving are such that he does not give only from surplus, but also from things that are essential to him, things he truly needs. So that's because the root of Avram's kindness comes from a place of bittul, of a self-nullification. He's not full of himself. He's empty of self. There's no ego that's looking for recognition. But there's a soul that sees another person in need. He sees another person who's worthy of kindness. And so he acts on that person's behalf. And so therefore it's the method and the mode in which he gives, but it affects obviously the amount that he gives, that it's so free flowing.
Yeah.
And so this kind of kindness doesn't generate any pride. There's no expectation of anything in return. No inner dialogue of look at me, I gave, I helped. It's more like, oh phew, now that person has a place to sleep tonight. Ah, Baruch Hashem, that person is able to eat dinner tonight, right?
Yeah.
I'm so relieved that they're doing okay. Now I could sleep better because somebody else was taken care of, not because I am now the status of a giver.
Right.
So we therefore find that the difference between the kindness of Yishmael and the kindness of the Jewish people is that Yishmael gives only from surplus, and his giving reinforces self-importance, whereas the Jewish people give from essential things, and their giving flows from self-nullification. So, again, not all of us are born this way. We have to work on this. This is what it means to refine our emotional attributes. Because kindness in its unrefined state could push a person to help in a superficial way, in a coarse way, out of self-interest and searching for honor and recognition. But when a person works on bittul, on self-nullification, dissolving the ego, forgetting about ourselves, then the kindness is transformed at its core. And it becomes a pure, genuine type of kindness, not in order to receive and to be recognized, but to do good. I want to just read a story related to this. It's not in your text.
Oh, okay.
But the story is told by Rabbi Mendel Shem Tov of blessed memory. It comes from the big Shem Tov family in Chabad. In fact, my wife's cousin is married to his grandson. So Mendel Shem Tov tells the following story. He says, in my childhood, during the years of World War II, we fled to Samarkand, together with many Jews who escaped the front, and that is where we lived. Conditions were dreadful: hunger, disease, and constant hardship. Everyone suffered terribly. One day, says Mendel, my father, I think his father was Ben Shemtiv, my father came home holding what felt like a great treasure, a loaf of bread. For a family with 6 children, it was priceless. A single loaf could bring real joy, even enough to last an entire week. The children were excited, happy, already preparing to sit around the table. Then my father took a knife, cut the loaf in half, and handed me one half. He handed Mendel one half.
Yeah.
Go, he said, and bring this to the Kesselman family who live nearby.
Wow.
He added quietly, they haven't eaten in 2 days. This is a characteristic story of the lives of Chassidim in those days, a life that embodied true kindness. Kindness given from scarcity, born of self-nullification, without drama, without calculations. And this expresses beautifully what it says in Ayom Yom. On the 15th of Iyar, it says, in the days of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, it was common amongst the Chassidim to repeat the following maxim. They would say, Der Stickel Breist, was ich hab, is deiner wie meiner. This piece of bread that I have is yours as much as it's mine. And they would even place the word yours first. Yours as much as mine.
Wow.
That's Chesed of Avraham. Meaning, you have to understand, they were so excited they got the loaf of bread.
They could have just gobbled it all.
And I mean,
Justified.
even if they could survive a week off that, and even that wouldn't be enough, but
Right.
they knew that the Kesselman family didn't eat in 2 days. But what are we going to eat tomorrow? Doesn't matter. The Kesselman family didn't eat in 2 days.
Right.
We're going to give them half the loaf of bread. Mind you, they probably didn't eat all day either. And they're all starving. But they didn't eat in 2 days.
No,
So
why
we're going to
didn't
share that with
this
them.
guy bring the loaf home first? Why didn't he go to Kesselman's first and give him half the loaf? Instead of torturing his kid about, like, here, take this half a loaf of bread, and instead of, you don't know.
Two thoughts that come immediately to mind. Number one, the route home was quicker than stopping at Kesselman's house first.
Okay.
Number two, so that his children should learn what you do when you know somebody else is in need.
Well, okay. I guess that's, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's get back to what the Rebbe says here on page 9. You want to read some of that? The sword and the bow. This is going back to what it says that Yaakov took the land from.
The entire idea of I took the land of the Amorites, the conquest of the land of the 7 nations, and its transformation into the land of Israel through a person's internal work is accomplished with my sword and my bow, as explained by the Targum Onkelos, the things of my prayer and my supplication, divine service of prayer. The Hasidic teaching explained the difference between a sword and a bow. A sword kills an enemy who is standing close by and clearly visible, but it cannot kill an enemy who is standing at a distance concealed. A bow, by contrast, enables a person to strike even an enemy who is far away and concealed.
Mhm.
But how does the bow reach a distant and concealed enemy? Precisely through pulling the bowstring back lower and lower, and then releasing the arrow toward a faraway target.
Right.
Or,
And normally you're not just pulling it back, but you're pulling it down because you want to get airlift so it goes further.
yeah. The more one pulls the bowstring back, the further the arrow will travel.
Okay, so this is just a metaphor.
Yeah, of course.
Keep going.
Reveal and conceal negativity. All this applies to divine service of prayer as well. There are 2 types of negative forces within the human inclination. One type we feel within ourselves as an enemy that is close and revealed. There's also another type we don't feel within ourselves at all, because it is deeply concealed, an enemy that is distant and concealed. This is alluded to in the verse to silence the enemy and avenger, and the avenger, the quote enemy unquote, is the openly revealed adversary, while the quote avenger unquote is the hidden adversary who schemes in secret. To conquer the negative force that we feel within ourselves, the enemy that is close and revealed, the level of prayer called my prayer, corresponding to the sword, is sufficient. At this level, there is self-negation. The bow and we bow and prostrate ourselves. However, this is not yet the deepest level of self-negation. To conquer the negative force that is more concealed in a person, the quote avenger unquote must reach a level of prayer called my supplication, corresponding to the bow.
Okay, so there's something about the supplication that's, I guess, more humbling. It's a
Yeah.
more humble state of prayer, and that's why it reaches further. It affects an enemy that's more deeply entrenched and not as easy to get to. You know, it's the bunker buster bomber of prayer. So let's see where this idea is based on. Source 6 from Torah Or, that's from the Alter Rebbe. Through prayer and beseeching God, we humble ourselves greatly. And the more humility we display, the greater the heavenly mercy we will receive. This is analogous to pulling back the string on a bow. The further back it goes, the stronger the force of the arrow will be, until the most hidden elements of the klipa are destroyed. So the Rebbe explains, when we bring ourselves to the deepest and most powerful state of self-negation, submission, and humility, by pleading with God bitterly with a feeling of profound lowliness, with heartfelt supplications that God help us against the enemy and the avenger, the negative inclination, that is, we are thus pulling the bowstring back lower and lower. So the more we approach Hashem with greater sense of humility, the more we're pulling that bowstring back. At that point, we are certain to succeed because we have the assurance that Yagaitu Matsasi, I labored and I found, and that God helps him. Then all the interpretations of the verse to silence the enemy and the avenger are fulfilled. So the lesson of this whole story is that on the one hand, we have to conquer the land of Israel, so to speak. What does that mean? That means within ourselves. We have the land of the 7 nations, that is, and to make it Israel. That the 7 emotions that we have should be transformed from Ishmaelite emotions to Israelite emotions. And on a deeper level, that's done through prayer. That all of that is done in a way of humility. Ultimately, it all comes down to that one word, the point of humility. That when we approach Hashem in prayer, from a haughty place, from a demanding and expectation place, then we're only going to reach so far. But if we want to get to the avenger, not just the enemy, meaning places within ourselves that the Yetzer Hara is lurking and trying to figure out a way to make us stumble and fall and do the wrong thing, we have to approach prayer from a place of even greater humility. And this all connects back to the whole story of Menashe and Ephraim, to say that why did Yaakov bless Ephraim with a greater blessing? Because he was the younger one. He was the more humble one. Because he had that greater sense of humility, therefore he received the greater blessings. So that's what it all boils down to, that we have to be like Ephraim, or in contrast to Menashe, or to be like the Abrahamic kindness, not the Ishmaelite kindness, in terms of doing kindness in a humble way, in a way that it's not about ourselves, but it's about the cause. It's about serving Hashem. It's about doing what's needed, and then we'll also receive greater blessings in return.